Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Law and Crime. I'm Jesse Weber, and thanks for joining us here on the network where we cover the most interesting live trials and legal stories in the news today. We're going to be live in multiple courtrooms today, and we have a lot of legal stories to cover. So, a busy day. Thanks for joining us. Let's get started. And that's what kind of day it was yesterday. Let's break it all down. Joining me is juvenile judge and trial attorney Judge Ashley Willcott. Judge, great to see you. Good morning to you. A lot to discuss in this case. Apparently, he wanted the following questions asked, and his attorneys didn't want to ask him. The questions were, 1, did the warden offer you an agreement in concern to your colostomy contradicting your agreement he laid out to Senator Sanders? Question 2, how has being treated like an animal affected you? What's going on? Because I think we're all a little confused.
Let me just say, it is unusual, and wow, yesterday, what testimony, and good morning, Jesse. So the first question, what's the relevance? Who cares? I guess in his mind it's relevant because all that plays into his theory that everybody else has caused him to do this action, that it's everybody else's fault. Previous testimony, he said it was the fault of his federal probation officer, and that's the reason he ended up in this mess. So I'm assuming he wants to bring to light some type of agreement to say it's their fault. And the second, I think he, again, is trying to justify his actions and say it's not my fault, it's their fault. They treated me like an animal in prison, and therefore I'm the person that I am. What a bizarre case.
Well, I think the other way of looking at it is he doesn't want to go back to prison for the rest of his life. He wants to be executed. So I think a part of him, he wants to say to this jury, this is what's going to happen if you send me back to prison, as a way for them to feel sorry for him. But let's go back to Scott Nelson himself when he was on the stand yesterday. If you haven't seen it, oh boy, wow. So Judge, you heard it all there. What do you make of that?
Oh, wow. It's the first time I've heard a defendant say, yes, I want the death penalty. And it's going to be interesting to see what the jury does with that, because the jury may feel like, guess what? That's too good for you. Instead, you should have to serve out your sentence and suffer the consequences and be punished for the consequences of what you did. Crazy testimony.
So let me ask you this. If he thought, let's say he thought he was going to be found guilty, let's say he wants to be executed, why did this even go to trial? Why did he even put up a fight? And if that's the case, if you have somebody who admits to what they did, wants to be executed, can't you just give them their wish?
Well, listen, Jesse, remember, I don't think he would ever agree to anything because he wanted to be heard. He wanted to tell everybody it wasn't my fault. Look what they did to me. I still had a colostomy bag. I lost my job. I was homeless. I was destitute. This is what you all did to me. And I think he very clearly wanted to be a public figure. He's a narcissist. He wants to be all about himself. It's all about him, nobody else. He never once talks about the victim or any remorse or apologizes. None of that. He wanted to be heard. He wanted center stage. And you can't get that by offering a plea, but you can get that by testifying.
How do you control a client like this? I mean, you can see the friction between him and his attorneys.
You can't. You can't. Bottom line, you cannot control your client. You can only do what they've done, which is make the judge rule on things that they don't agree with, that they have advised with, because they don't want to be ineffective assistance of counsel. I think they've done a good job putting it on the shoulders of the judge in circumstances where he wants to go against their legal advice, like being asked those 2 questions.
What a client to have. First, he admits to murdering a woman, and then he says he wants to be executed. Not ideal. Okay, Judge, I want to understand what's happening here. Are they just trying to say that Mr. Nelson thinks that he's somehow very special, deserves special treatment, and that really the only person to blame for his entire life and his conditions is himself?
I think so. And, take what he just testified to. The PO was important. That's the story he wanted to tell. Again, this defendant has made it all about him. He wants the focus on him. He wants everyone to know whose fault it is, why it's not his fault. And it's really, it's remarkable, Jesse, that this is the approach this defendant's taking, because he's not capable of anything else. He is never going to accept responsibility or show any remorse for the fact that he brutally murdered someone.
It's easy. It's easy to poke fun at the defendant and say, look at this guy, he's testifying. But does it have a value to this jury? And the reason I say this is, I said it before and I'll say it again, he takes the stand during the trial phase and he says he never intended to kill Jennifer Fulford. And correct me if I'm wrong, didn't that give the jury some pause? Because they deliberated for quite some time, and we believe one of the issues was whether or not this was an intentional premeditated murder. So if he goes back on the stand now and talks about certain things, does it give the jury pause on what to consider for the death penalty or not?
Well, I do agree that they did take longer to deliberate than I certainly expected. However, I think it goes to show that they are taking it as seriously as they should. They're considering all of the evidence. I think they're going to do that in their deliberation of this penalty as well. But let me just say this, Jesse. I think the point is, and the point of this testimony is, don't be played by the defendant, because that's what he's doing. And he's trying to play you, and he's telling you what he wants you to hear. And that, I think, is the significance.
But it's funny we talk about the mental health of the defendant. He seems to be, you could argue, pretty aware of what's going on. You could argue that he has a warped perception of expectations and how life works and who owes who what. But he has a pretty good concept of what is happening in the world, and isn't that an interesting facet for them to consider here in terms of mental illness? I mean, he talks about his knowledge of the law and the legal system a lot.
Right. No, I think he's very bright, but he's exceedingly manipulative. And that's the piece that I think the jury needs to grasp onto or realize, is that everything he's saying, everything he's coming out of his mouth, he's doing in a way that he thinks it's best to tell a story, to manipulate, to get what he wants. That's what he's doing. That's part of his personality disorder.
You think he was surprised that he was found guilty?
Was I? Not at all.
No. Do you think he was? He was.
You know, I do think he feels like, listen, it wasn't my fault, so I should not have been found guilty. I think that's probably true. I
mean, it's this idea, and we've heard it again from experts who've testified on behalf of the defense, that the way he processes information, the way he makes decisions, is not the way that everybody does it. And so perhaps he has this warped perception of what the world owes him. And I keep wondering, you know, the insanity defense was denied for him. He was deemed to be competent to stand trial. In another state, in front of another judge, could the insanity defense have worked? I do think it depends on the particular jurisdiction, but keep this in mind, Jesse, as you well know, the insanity defense is, was he capable of understanding what he did at the moment that he committed the crime? And that's a very different issue than how he might be the rest of the time. And remember all of the things that he purchased at Walmart for this. And so I think there's good argument that at the time he committed the offense, he knew what he was doing. Interesting. All right. Well, a lot more to discuss with Mr. Scott Nelson. Let's take a break. When we come back, we're expecting to jump live. Stay tuned.